Hey everybody. Quick video recap. I posted some materials for you in Tumblr like just a minute ago, but I wanted to go over them quickly on video. So the stuff that I posted dealt primarily with the negotiation of authorship and authenticity in the texts that are sort of going to carry us through into the Middle Ages, and the sort of two texts that we've just looked at are really concerned with authenticity and with accuracy, and those two texts are the Christian New Testament and the Quran. But the negotiation, like the way that authenticity is established and the way that authority is negotiated, is very different in the Quran from how it is in the New Testament. So in the Quran, obviously you want to be very accurate about reporting the guidance provided by Muhammad. That's maybe less central and less the case with the Sufi poems, because they're organized in a way similar to the way that Job is organized as sort of devotional or meditative texts. But this notion of attribution, of making sure that the words and the guidance really did come from exactly these people and they said it exactly this way, is very similar in the Christian New Testament. So like we read the Sermon on the Mount, like it's very critical to the legitimacy of the text that these exact words were said by this exact person. Similarly with the guidance from Muhammad, it's very important that this is like really his stuff that he really said, right? You can't just kind of like, extemporize and sort of recap it like on the fly, right? Like it has to be really precise. That attribution as authority and okay, I'm going to back up a second. Attribution as authority, maybe not so much, because there is this thing in the ancient world and up through the Middle Ages where if you want your text to be authoritative, you do attribute it to somebody who's already famous and well-known, and it's almost like you are presenting your text as a commentary on or an addition to or sort of like a piggybacking on their stuff, right? Like you mean your text to be understood under their umbrella. And it's kind of like a gesture of respect also, as well as attribution there. And that's something we can talk about a little bit in terms of what we count as plagiarism, because it would be really not cool to pretend that your words actually belong to someone else, in a similar way that it's really not cool to pretend that someone else's words really belong to you. How all of that gets negotiated through the ancient world into the Middle Ages, up until really the beginning of the modern period, it's just a whole different ballgame. Like the set of expectations is very different. So maybe attribution as authority isn't quite what I want to say. The accuracy of attribution and the idea of recording very accurately someone's exact words. This idea of writing as documentation, not in the bookkeeping sense of with an abacus and like we're counting the number of wine barrels that came in, but in the sense of recording someone's exact speech and reporting it with great precision. That's something that we really don't see elsewhere in texts from this period. It's something that we rarely see afterward, until we get to the modern era and sort of like the emergence of journalism after the printing press, right? Like that concern with accuracy in reported speech in particular is just, the normal thing is like you try and tell the story better than if you've ever had the experience of thinking of a great comeback the next day after you've had a conversation with somebody. In this time period, like when you retell the story, you tell it with better expressions than the first time around. So this idea of being really precise and documenting as carefully as possible what somebody would have actually said is a different configuration from what we see in most of the texts from this time period and in the ones that come immediately before and after. So that's kind of interesting to look at. The other thing is that besides the accuracy of attribution and sort of making sure we've got down the exact words, which, I mean, scholars argue about how exact that actually is and how faithful some of these representations really are. But I think it's clear in the text that the intent is there and the desire for accuracy is there and the intention to represent as accurate the reported speech, that's there, right? Like it's a concern of the text whether it is fully realized or not. But once you get away from that, the concerns around authority in textual transmission and like how the text itself should be treated are really different for the Christians promulgating their New Testament from what they are in the early Islamic period. So it is famously difficult to get a really good translation of the Quran because Muslim scholars have been famously reluctant to translate the Arabic. The sort of norm is if you want to read the Quran, you must do so in Arabic to translate the sacred text and subject it to all the vagaries of like translation is messy and you never say exactly what the original said. It's just not possible, right? Like I can read and write in like 3.5 languages, and I've so far never managed to say exactly the same thing in any 2 of them, right? It doesn't work that way. So there's something like potentially dangerous or even a little sacrilegious in it, like from that perspective in translating a sacred text. The Christian tradition does the exact opposite thing, man. Like Christians are all about translating this as many ways as they can. It's part, it is part of this go and carry the gospel to all nations thing, right? Like you want it to be as accessible as possible. You want to be able to, like, you will tell it over and over and over again as many ways as you can to get the message across, right? Both traditions are extremely concerned with the accuracy and sort of the curation and maintenance and preservation of their texts, but this leads to radically different practices, right? Like the same, like we really care about this text a lot, that same motivation leads to almost opposite, but certainly widely divergent practices of textual transmission and curation. And I think that's really fascinating on the one hand, just from a historical and a linguistic perspective, but it's also really interesting for us to keep in mind as we look at how the sort of geographic and cultural juxtaposition between these 2 traditions helps to shape the Middle Ages and kind of gives us the world in which the next set of texts we will be looking at are created. So that's kind of where I'm going to wrap this video, because the next place we are headed is into Beowulf, which is constructed very much in the mode of tradition as authority, right? Like the tradition authors the text and the scribe is just recounting it. So that's kind of interesting to look at too. If you have questions after you watch this video, leave me a message and let me know. I'll be happy to try and answer them. Thanks.